Hello everyone and welcome to our ETUI talk of October 2025. My name is Aida Ponce del Castillo. I'm a senior researcher at the ETUI covering legal and regulatory issues of AI and its labor impacts. And today I'm your host. I'm very grateful to have two hosts today, Julie Lüpkes and Marte Henningsen. Julie is a PhD candidate and research associate at the Digital Education and Schooling Department of the University of Oldenburg in Germany. And she focuses on the genesis of educational technologies, the so-called EdTech, and using media ethnography methods, she critically researches on EdTech and startups and their apps. She's also implementing educational concepts in algorithmic environments. Also, we have Marte Henningsen. She's also a PhD researcher at the Philosophy Department of Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And in her PhD project, she uses a critical analysis of the political economy of EdTech and of the translation of marketing promises into teaching realities. She worked as a research associate at the University of Oldenburg, where she co-coordinated a very interesting research project on the automated grading tool used by a German company, Phobis. And this is why I invited her to explain what she did in her research with her collaborators. This tool, it's an AI chatbot that teachers can use for school lessons. And both of our guests will tell us what you have found. So Julie and Merte, thank you for being here with us. And please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Aida, for this very nice introduction. Yeah, Julie is sharing the slides. Hello also to everyone from our side, and welcome to this talk titled The Challenges of the EdTech-fix, Technosolutionism in the Education Sector. And we are both, as Aida already said, PhD researchers from the field of critical EdTech studies. And yeah, we're going to start, we're going to go right in, and we planned quite a dense presentation today, but it should give you a broad overview over different aspects of this topic. So to start off, we have a recent headline from the US. It reads, AFT to launch National Academy for AI Instruction with Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic, and the United Federation of Teachers. Maybe let's clarify a few things first. So AFT stands for American Federation of Teachers. It's the second largest teachers union in the US with around 1.8 million members. And similarly, the United Federation of Teachers is the New York Teachers Union, which is affiliated with AFT. And you probably know Microsoft and OpenAI, and Anthropic is another large US American AI company. For example, they developed the model Claude. So we can see here, this is a press release from the AFT that they are partnering up, the union is partnering up with big tech in the US, and together they want to launch a National Academy for AI Instruction. And this is an initiative that is involving, for the moment, $23 million US. And this academy, the goal is to give every AFT member access to free AI training and curriculum. And so we asked ourselves, why are they doing this? Yeah, so why do we need more AI in schools? Why are we investing quite a lot of money into bringing AI training to teachers? Who would benefit from this arrangement? So we took a closer look at the AFT press release, so the headline that you just saw, and we collected some quotes from it to illustrate who some of the actors might be that benefit from this. So first up are, of course, teachers. For example, in the press release, they write, we want this technology to be used by teachers for their benefit, by helping them to learn, to think, and to create. Then, of course, we have students, and they write that they want to empower teachers with the knowledge and tools to guide their students through this evolving landscape. This is often referring to a changed job market. Then even beyond that, we have also education. So they write that through AI, education, teaching, and learning can be enhanced. So this seems to go beyond the individuals of teachers and students and improve education as a whole. Then we also have society, even broader than that. And they write that AI in education can help advance the democratizing power of education. And lastly, we also have big tech. So for example, the final quote I'm going to present to you is that they want to give teachers the opportunity to tell tech companies how we can create AI that better serves kids. So here we have the kids or the students that are benefiting from better products, according to them. We have teachers that are being given an opportunity, but we also have tech companies that gain quite valuable insights from the teachers and the usage of this product, and are then able to improve their own product. So it kind of seems that everyone benefits, right? So let's do this, let's bring AI into schools, but maybe it's also too good to be true. And this is also what we want to go into today, to kind of see, is it really true that everyone benefits as it is presented here? And before we do this, we're also turning our heads more towards Europe. And we collected some examples of European teachers' unions and how they responded to or acted with or are acting within this AI hype. These are just some examples that we are presenting here. First up, we have Germany. And for example, the German teachers' union GEW has in 2023 already released an AI guide that prioritizes the pedagogical values and human agency. So kind of one way to approach this topic. Then we have another example from Spain, and the Spanish Workers Union CCOO is also cooperating with Microsoft to enhance the AI skills of the workforce and to close the digital gap, as they write. And this is not a teachers union, it's a more general workers union, but it also includes teachers in this plan. And then we have the Netherlands. There's the Dutch Education Union AOB, and they approved the new collective labor agreement for universities. And in it, they also plan for a study to identify how AI can best be harnessed in higher education. So kind of focusing on the benefits, bringing them into education, and then also the technology. And the last example we have is from Estonia. And Estonia, maybe you've seen the headlines, has rolled out ChatGPT Edu earlier this year in their education system. And the Estonian Teachers Union, EHL, has not released an official statement on this development, so as far as we could find, so neither in opposition nor in favor of it. And what we want to show with these different examples is just that the approaches that unions take to AI in education can look very different. So what is this technology that we're actually talking about? Educational technology can be very many different things, maybe even things that we today don't really regard as technology even anymore. So for example, something like a textbook or a whiteboard or even the classroom furniture can all be educational technology. But here today we're talking about AI, and AI can also be very many different things. Even within the realm of education, there's also something like learning management systems or recommender systems for classes. But specifically, what today also probably most people are associating with AI is text generative AI, right? So something like ChatGPT, like Gemini, Copilot, Claude, and this is also what we're talking about today. So let's take a closer look at this text generative AI. This is the paper that Aida also mentioned earlier. This is a paper that I co-wrote with Professor Rainer Mühlhoff from the University of Osnabrück. It's in German, so probably not very accessible to most of you, but we also presented this paper at a conference last year. This is the screenshot on the bottom right. And this talk was also translated to English. And so if you use this QR code, you can also watch it if you're interested. You should land directly on the English version of it. I will also present the study here, but also only quite briefly. So what would we do, or what did we look at? So there's this company in Germany called Phobis. It's often referred to as an EdTech startup, and they provide digital workshops for teachers. And since the Gen AI wave, they've also provided generative AI tools for teachers. And they focus mostly on German high schools. They have government contracts with some federal states to provide these tools. So they're actually quite large companies if they have quite big government contracts. So the label of a startup is a bit questionable in this case. But what tools do they offer? They have different ones, and one of them is an AI grading assistant. And this is how it is presented on the website. The blue text in German the translation reads, "Make your work routine easier with the AI grading assistant." Yeah, a great promise. How does it work? You can tweak some settings. You can input the assignment that you set your students. You can choose different categories, what the AI grading should focus on, and also assign weights to it. Then you upload the student submission and you get back the feedback that can take different forms. You can get an AI text about the student text, which includes then feedback. You can have an error table pointing out different errors, and you can get a grade for the text. And the company markets this tool as a way of saving time as a teacher. And in Germany, there's also an issue of teacher shortages and a very high workload for teachers that are working. So then the marketing promises of saving time through this tool are, of course, quite effective. And in our research group, we were quite skeptical of these claims of time saving, etc. And what we wanted to see then was this tool and how it works, right? So we basically just tested it out. We got a license and created 10 fake submissions by students to an assignment that we also created ourselves. It's an assignment that was supposed to be something that you might expect in a 10th grade class. And then these fake texts we had them AI graded each one 5 times. And then we analyzed these 50 AI gradings that we got, and we analyzed them quantitatively and qualitatively. And I will only briefly go over the quantitative analysis here and skip the qualitative one entirely. But again, if you're interested, use the QR code to watch the video. But let's get into some of the results and insights. So what we have here are just the results based on the grades that were provided. So we have on the x-axis the different texts, 1 through 10, and on the y-axis the grades. What you need to know is that the higher in the graph, the better the grade, and everything below the black line is a failing grade. And what we can already see is that for some text, there's some variation. So for example, text 2 and 3 is quite big difference. What is maybe most astonishing is text 8, which has, as you can see, a failing grade, so the second lowest grade you can even get, and also in another iteration, the second highest grade, and then also another iteration somewhere in the middle. And what was particular about this text is that it was a text that was actually not on topic. It was a completely different text. It was a great story about going to the swimming pool. And what we see here is that it shows that the AI really does not understand what is written or what the students are saying. So every teacher would have clocked immediately that this is not an assignment that the student, or that this is not fitting to the assignment that the student should have been working on. But the AI does in some cases, And this was a very important takeaway from this. And then the next one, another thing that we tested for was to incorporate the feedback. So we pretended to be the students and used the feedback that the AI provided to incorporate into the text. So we changed the text and then had it be graded again. And this is how the grades developed over different iterations. So we did this multiple times for the same text. So we had the blue line is one text where we tested a few times, and the red line is another text. So we have, in theory, if I was to have a human teacher who provided feedback, I would expect, if I incorporated the feedback, for my grade to get better, right? So this is how it should work. But here we can see it's going all over the place. It's going up and down and up and down. And this can be quite frustrating as a student, right? So you get feedback from the AI system, you then use this feedback to improve your text, and then you get a lower grade. This is not something that seems to be an enjoyable thing to happen. And what then was interesting to us, so what's this dotted line at the end of each graph? This is where we pretended to be the student who kind of gave up and just asked ChatGPT. So we said, I'm a 10th grader, this is my assignment, this is my text, ChatGPT, improve this text, please. And then the last grade for each of the lines, you can see, is then the best one that the student ever got on this text. It's 99% both times. And what I, as a student, would take away from this is, why should I even bother? Why did I do this whole up and down thing before if I can just give it to ChatGPT? And this is actually the only way to get this good of a grade. And if we take this ad absurdum, it's actually a student handing in an AI text and then a teacher generating an AI feedback, right? So we have a very, very efficient system. It's super quick. We can have both text and feedback generated in a few seconds. But is it worthy of the name education, right? Nobody's really learning anything. We're just pretending to be. And this was also very important insight for us, and also to try to see what effect does it have on education, or can it have on education. So these are some of the insights we found. And what happened then is that before we presented this publicly, we also talked to some people from Phobos about this study, so from the company. And in this talk, we mainly talked about responsibility, because at that point, the tool, this AI grading tool, had been available for over a year, and the company had government contracts, as I said already, and they are worth millions of euros, right? So a lot of money. And of course, then the question arises, who's responsible? Not just who's responsible when the tool fails to perform adequately, but also before that, who's responsible to check and verify these tools, whether they function as advertised. And in the talk, the company thanked us for doing this very extensive and systematic evaluation of the tool. Yeah, these are their words, extensive and systematic. And this is not a systematic or extensive study at all. Yeah, this is a very small sample size. This is very experimental. But this was their words. And when we told them that this was actually not a systematic study at all, we asked them why they didn't even do this very experimental small evaluation, why they didn't do this themselves before. And then they often referred back to their status as a small startup and being too small to provide this kind of testing, because it's so extensive and systematic, apparently. So they don't have the resources for that. Well, but then we can also say, okay, let's look into the future. And they said, of course, in the talk that they were taking action immediately and doing something about this. And then you can also read this as taking responsibility. And for example, they changed also indeed some things on the website, and including a very prominent description of the possibilities, but also the limits of this tool. And what they claimed most in this talk as an improvement was actually that they came up with a new prompt. And the prompt is that what sits between the interface that you fill out as a teacher and the AI model that then actually generates this feedback. And they said that they improved this prompt and it was much better now, and it's a much better tool now. And if we didn't want to test this now again to have this kind of before and after effect, yeah, we didn't actually do a second test run. But you can say, well, this seems a bit responsible by the company, right? So they had effort, they put in effort to improve their tool, and now they want to see if it functions better now. And when we asked them to send us the new prompt, they did this, and in it there were multiple examples to showcase to the model how it should behave. Yeah, so you can call this prompt engineering or something in a different names, but they use different tricks in this prompt to kind of tell the model how it should behave. And in this, one of the examples was very similar, nearly verbatim at some points, to our test example that we used in the first test run. So then, of course, if we did a second one, the model would have probably behaved quite well, actually. But to us, it seems that there was so more talking of responsibility rather than taking responsibility. And at this point as well, I'll give over to my colleague, Julie.
Yes, thank you. So I'm also looking at an AI-driven feedback tool for the use in high schools in Germany, but I'm doing that from a very different angle. My PhD project is drawing on material from an ethnographic study, looking at the inner workings and decision-making processes within a German EdTech startup, which is developing an AI-based feedback and grading tool for the use, as I said, in German high schools, but it's just a matter of time until they will roll out in different educational settings as well, I think. So this means that I analyzed ethnographic field notes gathered during 10 months of field work, 8 of these from the inside as an ethnographer at the AI EdTech startup. That means I was part of their team for 8 months. At one point, I even took over their public relations and social media department, and And by that, I had a very deep inside look into how they made this type of EdTech. So I also held interviews with team members and other stakeholders. I gathered a lot of additional material on site, like pictures, videos, documents, software code, and physical material. And right now I'm looking at all of this material with a grounded theory analysis approach, which means that I really let the material speak for itself, which lets me create a theory of how this tool is being built. And one moment, whoops. And the tool that I had a look at, it was quite similar to the one that Marte just described, the Phobos tool, but the creation of the grading grid, so basically what sits behind it, is much more precise, much more detailed than the Phobos tool. And what I have discovered so far is that the teaching practices that are being automated in this tool of course, undergo a process of transformation, but the company is relying on established grading and assessment practices and paradigms. They're not really revolutionizing anything pedagogically because they're taking this idea of a grading grid that they then automate. And so for me, also central so far was the question about pedagogical sovereignty. So basically the negotiation or the renegotiation of decision-making and responsibility within the tool. It shows a lot of frictions between, for example, market expectations. So we already heard about this promise of saving time for both the users, but also that's a promise they make to possible investors. There are frictions with legal aspects. Of course, we have the European AI Act that would probably coin this kind of system a high-risk AI system because it deals with grading and assessment. So it asks for human oversight, which is taken over by the teacher in this case. And also the technological development also plays a role. For example, the large language models that are in use, they limit what is possible to even make with the technology that we have today. And of course, also the teaching profession changes a lot when AI takes over core practices of grading and feedback. And so the next step for me will be, first of all, to test this tool's robustness with students of mine. So I'm also teaching here in the teacher training courses at my university. And we're going to be looking at 8 different tools that are in use in German classrooms right now. For example, also Phobos, but also the tool that I've been looking at. And we're going to be adapting and enhancing Marte's and Reiner's methodology. But for me personally, in my PhD project, the making of EdTech will stay in the focus of my study. And this is where I'm going to hand over to Marte again.
Yeah, so we presented both of our research, or given you quite a glimpse into our research, and we wanted to go beyond this in this presentation today, and also talk about the companies and people behind these technologies, because we find this very important, and to give you also a broader overview. And I'm going to start with the US EdTech bubble. So you probably know most of these companies here actually. So OpenAI, Meta, Microsoft, Anthropic, Google, these are all big tech companies, right, from the US. They're all from Silicon Valley. And you also have Khan Academy, which is maybe adjacent to this big tech bubble. But we can see here is that actually those companies which are present in the edtech market are companies that did not start out as edtech companies, right? So they all developed technology and all became very big in the technology environment with different goals, right? So Google and the search engine, for example, Microsoft initially developed operating systems and so on, and now they're expanding into the education market, right? It's not the initial interest in in education that drives them, but rather now they're moving into this as another market. And to take a deeper look, we also wanted to look at the people behind these companies, yeah, and what do they actually think, to better understand what might be happening also currently, but also in the future. And for this, I brought the example of the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. Maybe you know this. This is a text that was published. It's on the internet. You can also read it. I also recommend it because it gives quite a broad insight into how these people think about technology. It was, and also society, so also broader than technology. It was written and published by Marc Andreessen 2 years ago, and I've brought you 2 quotes from the text itself that highlights this technosolutionism that is very present, not just in this text, but in many others that you can read. So the quote is, "We believe," so we is the techno-optimists, he refers to himself and other people that subscribe to this as the techno-optimists, he writes, "We believe that there's no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology." He brings examples such as, "We had a problem of heat, so we invented air conditioning. We had a problem of isolation, so we invented the internet. We had a problem of pandemics, so we invented vaccines. We have a problem of poverty, so we invent technology to create abundance." And this is quite silly, right? I hope to you as well. This seems to me quite silly and ridiculous and quite naive. And we can also laugh about this, and maybe we should laugh about this. But what is also important is that Marc Andreessen has a lot of power within Silicon Valley and beyond. In case you don't know the name, he's not one of the CEOs of big tech companies, but a venture capitalist and investor. So kind of in the second row, but still very influential in Silicon Valley, alongside names such as Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt. And he also last year became an advisor to the current Trump administration. So also power beyond Silicon Valley into the US administration. And on this topic, we also brought the example of a very recent event that happened. Maybe you heard of this, but this is the White House dinner with President Trump. It's from last month, which was attended by a lot of Silicon Valley power players, as this headline calls it. This includes, for example, the CEOs of OpenAI, Meta, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Oracle. So a lot of the companies that I showed you 2 slides ago. And they are meeting with Trump and other high-ranking Republican politicians. And you can watch on YouTube also some snippets from this talk or from this dinner. And they have a lot of praise from both sides about each other. So the administration is praising the tech industry, and the tech industry is praising the administration about their policies. And this was already in September, so we know quite clearly what the policies and politics of Trump actually look like. And what we see from this, or why should we even focus on this, is that these people are actually very influential in the models that are then developed, and the models are also influencing quite a lot the technologies that are developed here, because often they are directly integrated into the technology. And we also learned from this that EdTech is immediately political. And at this point, I'll give back to Julie.
Yes, thank you. So basically after this, I would rather say worried look about the US, whose big tech actors are very much active in the European edtech ecosystem as well. Let's have a closer look at the European context. So in Europe, we have a very prominent supranational actor, which is the European EdTech Alliance. It presents itself as a non-for-profit consortium of national edtech associations and innovation clusters working with founders and providers of educational technology to support the growth of a sector across Europe and beyond. It was formed in 2019. It represents over 2,600 edtech organizations in nearly 30 countries all over Europe. Its members meet regularly to exchange insights, compare policy and market developments, identify shared challenges, and highlight emerging opportunities. And It also says it fosters collaboration, transparency, and coordinated action across the European EdTech ecosystem, linking national context to a broader evidence-informed vision for digital education. So to sum it up, it presents itself as a neutral EdTech lobby with the goal of standardization, interoperability, and evidence-based impact of EdTech. And this already shows that it has definitely a certain, let's say, phenomenological paradigm to education impact, if we say evidence-based here. And how do they do this? So they create community. For example, they've created maps of European edtechs and funding actors. They give workshops on different topics for startups, for example, on how to comply with the European AI Act to increase trust from potential clients. And they have special fundings for especially women in edtech. And they are part of projects, for example, on policymaking and networking. And maybe as an example, of course, because that's where we work at, the German edtech bubble. So, and I guess it will be quite similar in other European countries as well. We have established educational media corporations. For Germany, it's these three that have dominated the edtech market for decades, and they have been adapting their corporate portfolio to the digital market through, for example, investments in smaller companies, as well as introducing their own digital solutions. They're mostly catered to the wide customer base with established textbook lines and pedagogical approaches. And on the other hand, we have the edtech startup sector. So it's creating this kind of David versus Goliath situation. And of course, we also have the narrative of disruption through small players here. And I must say that so far from my fieldwork, I've realized that almost all new startups have an AI-based approach to their technology. In this startup sector, we have two prominent meta actors. One is the EdTech Next as an incubator and network for German EdTech startups, and the other one is Eduvation, a consulting company for EdTech startups. Together, they, for example, held the EdTech Next Summit from 2022 to 24. And the Eduvation consulting company also has the startup area at the Didakta, which is the biggest educational fair in Germany. And if we look a bit closer into this ecosystem, the Founders Foundation, who are the funder of EdTech Next, and the Foundation of German Startups have conducted a study in 2024 looking at the EdTech startup scene in Germany. They have identified around 500 active startups in the education sphere. And what they have found out is that, for example, only around 20% of the founders that are creating startups in Germany are from the humanities. So we see a lot of economics, we see software engineering or engineering, but we don't really see teachers, for example, people with an educational expertise. And the two leaders of the publishing institutions also summarize in the study the transformative potential of these startups is not to be underestimated. They say almost 500 edtech startups in this country are ready to drive forward the transformation of our education system. In terms of our economic and social future prospects, this is a very important asset that we must make the best possible use of. So what you can see here is that they're basically saying Germany needs to fund this sector more to be a good player in the international competition as well. So, and who else argues for AI in the German education system? So we have found, among others, what we call EdTech legacy startup founders to be discourse leaders in the German AI and education discourse. For example, these three people here. So EdTech legacy startups are companies that are well established in the EdTech market for years now, but they still refer to themselves as startups. They are a part of kind of first wave of edtech startups that were founded between 2005 and 2019. So before the COVID pandemic and the AI hype both boosted the German edtech market. And they have since been able to establish themselves, adapting to market changes and new technologies. And with this success, they are considered idols within the edtech startup community. Ideal examples of disruptive players in the educational media business. And some of their founders act as business angels for later generations of startups and are important people in the discourse on digitization, innovation, and the future of school education. So for example, on social media, for example, on LinkedIn, but also in schools and education politics, they are setting an AI-friendly, you could say, technosolutionist agenda, lobbying for edtech providers by stating that the future of education is a digital one. And what we can basically summarize here is that they produce both the technologies as well as the imaginaries surrounding them. And so far we've talked about the technology and the companies and the people behind it, so the what and the who. And now we're going to talk about how we talk about AI introduction to education, so the how and the content. So in the discourses about AI in education from the international edtech industry side, we identify basically 4 strands of narratives that render individual users and educational actors in different ways. First of all, we have one where AI in education is basically inevitable. It's going to come, it's going to be there, no matter what comes. We have one where it is means to an external and beyond education, for example, creating workers of the future. And one where AI is bettering education, like we've already heard a lot. And we have a last one that's giving a bit more hope, where the problem that is to be solved by AI is specific and concrete. So let's look a bit more into these 4 narratives. So the first one, the first discourse strand, in this one, educational actors are basically rendered powerless. AI is inevitable in this one. It's a next step of how teaching and learning will look like, as these utterances by scholars and entrepreneurs suggest. So AI does not need to be justified in this perspective, since it is the unquestioned future that lies ahead, also for education. In the second strand, it still looks like it looks at the future as inevitably AI dominated, but sees education as means to an end, as a way of preparing future workers for the AI era. Here, educators are being nudged to prepare students for this life ahead, meaning that a teacher or government that does not include AI education in their curricula and syllabi would act irresponsibly. And the second strand, often as in this US case, also includes narratives of a national leadership pressure, creating a sense of urgency in the wake of AI, of an AI labor and market change. So here we can see, for example, the quote, to ensure the United States remains a global leader in this technological revolution. The third strand already was quite prominent in our talk so far. It identifies AI as a way of providing better education. This can be seen in these examples that are going to be following from product websites by Canmigo, Microsoft, and Meta. They claim that AI will be able to simplify workflows, accelerate learning, improve efficiency, enable equitable education, improve results, expand possibilities, enhance skills, foster learning, empower classrooms or teachers, or accelerate learning again, or save time, personalize learning, and enhance teaching. So to put it in a nutshell, in this narrative, teachers who do not use AI in their teaching miss a huge opportunity to improve the education of their students. There is basically also no alternative to using it if you want to teach in the best way. The last strand still leaves some room for discussion about whether the use of AI is appropriate. It sees AI as a solution to some problems and contexts. And here studies are conducted to presumably find out which problems and solutions these could be, like this one by Google that claims to look for responsible development of Gen AI in education. So an important thing to keep in mind here is, though, who poses the questions for these studies, for these papers, and what questions are being asked. So in this case, Google compared different large language model powered tutors with each other, but they didn't compare it to human tutors, for example. And also they took the metric of the longest answer or conversation as a metric or criterion for learning impact. And there we could probably critically ask, is that necessarily good tutoring? But the strand number 4, also leaves room for critical actors in the industry and edtech products that reflect on real responsible use of Gen AI in education. For example, through co-design approaches and ethical approaches, like the ethical tech approach. This QR code leads to their page. I highly recommend this. And maybe we should urge the industry to follow this strand, where Gen AI use in education is not considered to be inevitable and inherently necessary, where tech and innovation are considered neither only good or only bad, but should be reflected upon before they make their way into the classroom. So to practice this, let's go back a bit. Let's go back to the concrete promises that AI grading and feedback tools make and look at the questions of whether they can hold these promises. So we have identified 3 layers here in the promises that these kind of tools are making. A systemic layer where the educational system should transform or change or be innovated. For example, they're saying things like, let us use the advantages of the digital age and let the wind of change blow in your school with our immediate solutions. That's a quote by one of the companies providing one of those feedback tools. We have identified an institutional layer where, for example, the human bias of grading should be erased, or learning should be individualized through automated grading and feedback. For example, Fellowfish, one of the feedback tool providers, says we're going to enable feedback individual, immediate, and effective. And of course, we have an individual level of the teachers or students. We already heard this a few times. So these tools should be saving time for what counts in the classroom. They should enhance teaching and learning and personalize learning. For example, the tool that I've been looking at says individualized feedback with precise correction for an optimal learning success is going to take place with their tool. And for example, automated grading tools promise to save teachers up to 70% of time spent on grading. I don't know where this number comes from, but that's what they promise. And if we then look at what is actually happening to teaching and education when certain aspects of it are being digitalized or automated, we can look into critical studies that already have been looking into effects of digitalization of education, and they show that digital tools and cultures change teacher and student roles and schooling practices. For example, the teachers of tomorrow are rendered as flexible, personalizing coaches. They're coaches now, they're not teachers in the traditional sense. Or they become data managers, only looking at, I don't know, overviews of data about their students and then acting upon it. Or they have to do a lot of repair and maintenance work to make sure that these datafied or digitized environments are actually doing what they should be doing. So it's also creating new work for the teachers after saving them time. And we can also see a change of practices. So we can see fragmentation of classroom routines, for example. And for the students, there's also much at stake. Like one critical studies about facial recognition, artificial intelligence says it would dehumanize, discriminate, inescapably datafy, permanently surveil, and ultimately control students. So this shows how especially the teacher profession and self-image are being negotiated and renegotiated through processes of digitalization and AI use. Still, the teachers, and that is a big problem, are being held accountable and responsible for actions and decisions within the digital or AI-enhanced environment. They're over-responsibilizing them. So the companies are over-responsibilizing the teachers. For example, data protection issues are outsourced to the teachers. They're the ones responsible for that. And in fact, if we put it in a nutshell, also pedagogical decision-making itself is being affected by the so-called enhancement of pedagogical practices through AI and other digital tools. So a whole group of educational workers, their profession changes. So the question is, who is there to fight for their rights? And that's where I'm going to be handing over to Marte again.
Yeah, just very briefly for the final remarks. These are the last two slides. Let's return to the role of teachers' unions also in this. So kind of returning to where we started from. And what we aim to show with this presentation is that the discourses and narratives created around AI in education can be quite one-sided. So created by those who also develop the technologies. And they can be quite dominant voices on why to deploy these technologies. And we believe that here unions can also play an important voice together and backed by critical researchers to provide also other perspectives in this discourse. So we saw the promises made by the technology companies often differ quite a lot to the realities of teachers, and these realities deserve to be heard and articulated. And we believe that unions can play quite an important role here and have a huge potential for affecting the discussions and practices of AI insertion into schools, and also for shaping the roles which we want technology to have in education, and explicitly also the roles which we want technology to not have in education. And for the last slide, I brought to you also a quote on this topic, on the topic of shaping the discourse. It's a quote by Neil Postman, who was a media theorist and cultural critic. He was skeptical of technology and insisted to ask the following questions whenever technology was proclaimed as the answer to a problem. And he writes, "There are many other questions I could suggest, but for now I will stick with these 6. What is the problem to which a technology is a solution? Whose problem is it? What new problems might develop because we have solved an old problem? Which people and what institutions might be most seriously harmed by a technological solution? What changes in language are occurring as a result of new technologies? And what sort of economic and political power will technology bring to which groups of people?" And our hope is that researchers and unions can take up the task of not immediately answering, but first maybe even asking these questions, and questions like this, to break up the technosolutionist illusion that this proclaimed Gen AI revolution of education is something that we want, need, and something that that has no alternative. And with that, I end our talk. Thank you. And yeah, I look forward to the questions.
Big applause to Julie and Marte for this fascinating socio-technical presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I think the audience too. Let me remind the audience that there is a Q&A box in which you can write your questions, and we will take them slowly. And let's start with one. Everybody, I think, has enjoyed the presentation as well, and thank you for being so pedagogically too. Do you think that the discourses on AI, with all its problems for the education sector that you mentioned, might be changed through and by the AI Act in the future? And if so, how do you think it might change?
Should I start or do you want to? Okay. So I can only say what I have been experiencing during my field work. So of course the new AI Act is a huge topic for especially the educational sector. And I think that a lot of these providers are hoping for their own product to be in a gray zone between, for example, the high risk level and the other levels. And so it's going to take a long time to actually figure out where are the nuances that make them have more responsibility, more transparency, more human oversight, for example. And that is something that really worries me because I also have a lot of hope that this will make the companies take the responsibility they should be taking. But yeah, I'm sometimes also not too hopeful. Yes, Marte, maybe you also want to say something about this.
Yeah, I think quite similar to what Julie said. I also think it very much depends. I think there's a great potential there, right? So having this regulatory framework is, of course, a huge lever that we can utilize to actually control some of the effects that these technologies have on education, some of what we described today. But it not automatically, I would say. I would say it still depends on who is involved in these discussions around it. So who then decides also what is being regulated in specific and who's heard in these discussions. And I think this is something that is not predetermined just by the regulatory text. And this is something that is still being negotiated and contested.
All right, and continuing with the AI Act, I think that most of these uses fall into the high-risk category because it says so. Uses of AI systems that deal with education in their various phases. In the various phases have to be assessed through an high-risk eye. But I don't know how can they perhaps fall out from the high risk. How it seems very difficult for me to have uses that are not really high risk. But in this case, and following the AI Act approach, another question from the UK. It says, what do you think unions could demand of governments and companies to improve this so-called transparency and accountability and to push for products to be tested properly? We don't have a testing requirement really specifically in the AI Act, maybe in the standards will come. Do you think that there is a realistic way to counteract the power of big tech and assert our own educational values, given the power of these companies, their increasing influence on governments? Back to you.
Okay, maybe I'll start. I really like this question. Do I believe that unions have the power to counteract this? I feel like I want to believe this, right? So this is what I would like. And I don't think it's there automatically, but I think that unions have the potential to create this counterweight and counterbalance. It's not easy. I don't think anyone believes that. But there are also, of course, different ways through which unions can act. So they can also act as public discussons and public counterweights to government narratives. So what we just presented, also the ways how AI is talked about in education is also, we talked mostly about technology companies here, but governments also often fit into this, what we described. Yeah, this bettering education narrative is often also seen there. And I believe like a public counterweight would already be quite beneficial. Then also bringing to light the realities of workers in education, and then also in direct negotiations with government. And yeah, I do believe there's a lot of work to do. This, I'm not naive or something, but I think there's a lot of work, but I think it is work that can be done, or yeah. I don't know. I don't want to be too activist about this, but those are also my roots, I have to say.
You are a research activist, and is there anything that you'd like to add, Julie?
No, I think I agree.
We pass to another very similar question, and then we take another set of different questions. Also, Lindsay Grant says, related to the above, do you think there is a role for a national or supranational body to evaluate and endorse particular AI platforms and applications as meeting at least some shared minimum standards, or should this remain the decision or responsibility of individual schools or teachers? That's very hard. What do you think about?
So one thing that I think about this is that there are already a lot of very, very good initiatives. We already shared some of them that are looking into what are possible, let's say, toolboxes to evaluate these kinds of tools. So the resources are there. And I think maybe also with the power of the unions and the teachers themselves, we should fight for these tools to actually be part of the reality. Like before a new technology is introduced to classrooms, I think they should undergo this kind of, I wouldn't call it quality check, because it also has so many ethical layers that are not really, I don't agree with the quality check there. It's a different kind of approach, I would say. But we need to ask also the philosophical questions about it, and things like what will it change in not only the teacher profession, but also teacher and student relationships, for example. And I think that these kinds of questions are not being asked enough. And I think that also policymakers and people working in ministries, for example, in Germany, the federal state ministries are deciding on which tools to choose and which tools to buy for the schools. They should be knowing about these tools for evaluating the use before they make huge contracts with EdTech providers, for sure. Yes, I don't think it should be.
So a responsibility of governments to do an assessment before procurement or before having big contracts with big techs. From another perspective, Marte and Julie, Nick here has another question. It feels like there is a lot of focus on tech startups or big tech players and how they sell their products. But realistically, marketers will market. Would it not be more fruitful to better educate the consumer, in this case, the teacher, on what AI is and isn't good for? Are there any good large-scale initiatives on this? What's your experience?
I'm just going to start, but I really like this question. Of course, there is a huge focus also in this presentation on the marketing narratives by tech companies. But we are doing this also for a reason, because often these voices or these actors are also the ones who are currently doing this job of educating, in brackets, teachers about these AI tools. So for example, Phobis is also doing workshops on their tools and going to schools, not just to market them, but also to offer workshops to teachers what they can do with AI. And I really think it's very important to have other voices there that also provide different perspectives. So as we did today with our research, but it should not be the sole responsibility of the teachers to or even the educational institutions to gather all this knowledge from all these different sources themselves, and then having to make these decisions themselves, right? It's part of this over-responsibilization of teachers. I'm not sure I know of any of large-scale initiatives. It's very difficult. There are some initiatives by federal states on AI technologies in Germany, at least. Yeah, but they also very prominently feature AI technologies, but they're developed then by the federal state and also then accompanied by informational campaigns. I don't know if Julie has anything to add, maybe.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, I myself, I work at a university that has a lot of teacher training, and I think that's also a very important step to take to, at a very early age, educate the teachers to be about what AI does and what it can do and how they're gonna responsibly integrate it into their teaching and classroom practices. So I think that's also an important factor here.
And
But I
this
wouldn't be the
yeah,
only one.
sorry, and this AI talk is already an instrument to also reach that level of education and disseminate among teachers, at least maybe, well, in Europe and abroad, because we can reach a lot of people. Also, in this area of the responsibility, we have Michael with his questions, very concrete approaches. So what do you see as a concrete example for the responsibility or responsible or targeted use avenue? Question: how to best install these in institutions and education systems? Should we have more dialogue with the industry or tech ed industry, excuse me, bringing forward needs, but also setting rules and conditions?
Yes, for sure. And I think that at least for the German case, which is the one that I've been in contact with a lot, they also ask for this. They are asking for also critical voices. And I think it's really important to, yeah, leverage this possibility of like, let's say, critically informed edtech. And I think it would only, yeah, make edtech and edtech use better if we had more conversations instead of just blocking it off and say, you know, all technology is bad, because that's also not what our talk was aiming at. It's this way in between, looking at what's responsible use, how can be tools be made responsibly with different kind of effects in mind.
It would be great if we could perhaps envision kind of an index to assess which tool or application is responsible. There is a similar project with the digital platforms of those who are delivering food or other services, which type of platform is ethically and enhances labor and social values. We can do the same with edtech platforms, and maybe there are other.
Just add something, sorry. Maybe just really quick, but also I would agree to what you said before, but also sometimes I would also really like to even decenter technology, or specifically more AI, from these conversations sometimes, to start from the problem and say, what are we currently missing in education? What do we want to change? And then explore different routes of answers to these problems, and not presuppose technology or AI as the solution and then just ask, how is it best used, or how can we mitigate risks or something. So sometimes I think it's also good to start by decentering technology altogether, without wanting to be this role of the technology opposition or something. I'm a big fan of technology, and I think AI does have certain use cases, but we should focus on the use cases first and then on the technology.
Okay, interesting approach. And Martina Di Rodolfo here brings another alternative to look at, and it's the non-profit edtech sector, if I may. I don't know if you have found any non-profit edtech platform in your research. Let's discuss that later. But she asks, is it realistic to think that non-profit edtech solutions built with a needs-based approach and not a market-based approach can serve the needs of education? Again, do you have an example of a non-profit edtech?
Julie, do you want to go, or?
Is there any
Yeah.
edtech company that is non-profit? Do you know?
So there are a lot of I would say non-profit projects that are really looking into the co-design approach as well. So for example, learning management platforms that universities work with in their everyday life. But the problem always, or to me sometimes, is that that's only for a fixed amount of time. The funding goes, I don't know, for 3 years. It's publicly funded, and then it's hard for them to to get the next step and really like establish themselves as an
Over
actor
time. Yeah.
over time. That is the longitudinal effect of these kind of projects is the problem right now. And I would love to work on solutions to this problem because I think that's a very good approach, the open educational resources approach.
There is the other end of the question is those who are experimenting, right? And those who are experimenting, the startups that are trying to put the products into the market, need a sandbox, a playing field where they can test and retest and adjust the models. So Ulrike Bollmann asks, do you have an example for the use of a regulatory sandbox approach in the education sector, either in Germany, the Netherlands, or anywhere in the world?
Marte, do you have an idea?
Actually, I don't have one on the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, it's fine. And just just as an interesting note, remember, Julie, that you mentioned the 74% of efficiency. Here, Ulrike also says that the figure came from McKinsey, so we know the source now. And our very, very last answer, unless you have more questions, of course. It's from a user, I cannot read the name, but it says, do you know if there is already examples in which teachers have been forced to use AI against their will? Question number one. Question number two, on the other hand, is there any work or example or union campaign on the issue of AI without worker approval?
I'm not sure I understand the last one, the last question, but maybe on the first one, I don't know of an explicit example where someone was explicitly forced, but also then saying someone is forced to do something opens up quite a broad picture, right? So it can have different implications. So if I accept, for example, the overwork of current teacher professionals, and then give them AI solutions, but don't change anything on the work stress or workload otherwise, am I then forced to use it? Of course not, but I am then forced to work my weekends, for example, and to be overworked the whole time. And so implicitly, I'm highly nudged, or maybe it's the only possibility for me as a teacher to use these systems. So this, for example, because it's sometimes very difficult with these technologies to say, when you can freely choose, you can just say you don't want to use them, of course. But then often the realities are more complex than this. And yeah, I'm not sure I understood the second question, to be honest.
Well, just to complete perhaps the first question, maybe the only example that comes close to a mandatory use of AI was in the UK during the pandemic, 2020, when AI-level students were forced to take their exams through an AI system, and teachers were obliged by the government to develop this kind of algorithmic thinking on how to evaluate and what to evaluate. The result was we had students going out in the London streets saying, we need our teachers back, and had huge demonstrations saying we don't want to be assessed through an algorithm. So this is maybe one enforced and unsuccessful example of AI, both for teachers and students. Well, the second question is there any example on the issue of AI with worker approval, meaning being supported by workers saying, yes, we want to use this AI, or without worker approval? If you know any.
So whether it is integrated into the schools without worker or with worker approval depends very much on the educational institution, I would say.
Right.
And also, of course, the workforce often is not a homogeneous group, right? So there within, for example, schools or high schools, there can be very different voices, and you can say, well, we have workers' approval because some colleagues approved of this tool, or you don't have workers' approval because others didn't. So I think it's quite hard to ascertain where there is disapproval is present or where it isn't. It's often quite nuanced, I would say. And I think what is most important is that teachers or workers have the ability to intervene and take part in these discussions. Without this part of over-responsibilization. So even just inviting them can sometimes not have the desired effect.
Right. And Julie, you have the very last seconds before we close this webinar. What would you like to share?
Yeah, I also agree with what Marte just said. Like, sometimes looking at these kind of things can make you or leave you feel powerless. And I don't think that that's what we should feel in the end of this talk, but instead we should think about this to be something that we can be powerful in the future ahead of us. And now is the time to be so. When we look at other countries that don't have this luxury, it seems anymore, to really make choices, informed choices about AI use in education.
And empowerment. We learned that from you as well. And this brings us to the end of today's episode. Hearty thanks to our guests, Julie and Marte, and of course to all of you, the participants. With you, we couldn't have had this AI talk. And I hope that you have found this episode very interesting, and we see each other next time. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
And thank you also to you, Aida, for this great moderation and introduction and everything, and the invitation as well.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.